Let's talk about enterprise risk management. I know a lot of people have heard the terminology, but how about you giving a definition of it, if you will? Okay.
George, I would be happy to. Absolutely. Let's start with a really basic definition that is that enterprise risk management is a process. It's a business process like many other business processes, such as management by objectives or your budgeting process.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is to better ensure that the organization will meet its strategic goals and objectives. How? By identifying the risks that might impede that goal achievement. And that's both insurable and non-insurable risks.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And then once you've identified the risks in an ERM process, then you have to quantify them, prioritize them, and then the most significant ones get reported upward, and they get addressed with mitigation action plans, which are continuously monitored, just like any other action plan that the organization might have for any of its processes.
Well, let me ask you something, Donna. What's the difference between ERM, enterprise risk management, and risk management?
I'm glad you asked that, George, because there are some differences. The first one is that in the past, risk management departments were primarily focused on insurable risks. But today, a chief risk officer is just as worried about whether or not customers' buying habits are changing or that a new technology will disrupt the marketplace and have an impact on a company's product line. So they are just, again, as interested in strategic risks, like the ones I just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
as they are about the day-to-day risks. The other thing is, in enterprise risk management, things are not quite as siloed. There's usually a risk management committee that's comprised of the top people in all of the functions in the organization, and they're working together to try to find what the key risks are to the organization. And they also, through that effort, find correlated risks, which have often been neglected in a siloed approach. And the third thing is, the third really big difference is that with enterprise risk management today, there are very clear standards and frameworks to follow, and that wasn't always the case with risk management in the past.
Oh, now, is this for, I got it now, but is this primarily for big businesses, or is it enterprise risk management work for medium-sized or even small businesses?
Again, I'm very glad you asked that question, because I think, you know, up until now, it has been viewed as something that the large organizations, especially the large global organizations, need to do this. But that is changing. I think middle-sized and even small businesses are beginning to realize the power in identifying their risks early enough so that you can take corrective action and avoid serious problems to your business.
Good. All right, let's talk about it. Tell me about it.
Well, how important ERM is, you know, is part of, you know, this whole discussion of its migration from large to smaller companies. Data was recently collected by the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants and North Carolina State University. And what that response from 1,093 surveys told them was that 68% of the boards of directors are asking for senior executive involvement to be somewhat or extensively increased. So we know that boards of directors, senior management is very, very interested in making sure that ERM is practiced in the organization. And very recently, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners have called for ERM through something called ORSA, the Own Risk and Solvency Assessment mandate that has come out from the NAIC. They adopted a model law in 2012. They issued their guidance manual in 2013, and the effective date was this year, January 1st, 2015.
Uh-huh.
And this new requirement is intended to foster enterprise risk management in insurance companies. Now, this particular piece of requirement or regulation has to do with insurance companies, but I think it's a predictor or a bellwether for what we'll expect to see in other industries. So it does, again, intend for insurance companies to have effective enterprise risk management programs.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's also geared to make sure that there's a good view of the on risk overall and the capital situation of those companies. And it is required of companies with gross written premium over $500 million, and a group, if it's a group holding company, over $1 billion, and some other entities if they're in financial distress. So ORSA is alive and well in almost, I think it's in 45 of the 50 states, and those reports will be very soon sent into the state commissioners' offices for review.
That's going to be interesting, for sure. First time around, it's going to be wild, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's, people are scrambling to get their ORSA reports.
Yeah, it takes a while.
One more survey I'd like to share with you, and that is the RIMS 2013 Enterprise Risk Management Survey, which was designed to gain insight on the current state of ERM. In this case, 1,000 risk professionals were polled. In the other, it was the first one I showed you, it was mostly folks from the finance function that answered that survey.
Mm-hmm.
This one was risk professionals. And what they're saying is that ERM has gained critical mass. 63% of the respondents either have full or partially integrated ERM in their organization. So,
wow.
This is it has grown, it is growing, and I think it's inevitable that, again, it will seep down from the very large organizations to the mid-sized organizations to the small organizations.
Right. Fascinating. Anyhow, so where do we go from here now?
Well, I would like to just say that, for all size organizations, one of the things that is important to do, I think, in helping them to consider ERM for their organization is to debunk some of the criticisms that have been out there. It's natural with any relatively new business process. There are going to be people who are naysayers. There are going to be people who only find the negatives. Or there are going to be people who are just very practical, and so they are going to be looking at both sides of the coin. And so one of the criticisms that has been leveled at ERM is that, well, it's not perfect. ERM can't identify and protect against all the significant risks or uncertainties in the business. Well, yes, that happens to be true, but, it's kind of a bogus argument in that, if an organization was able to, let's say, put in a new business process that would improve their overdue receivables and uncollectibles by 90%, not 100%, but only by 90%, would they not put that process in? If they could have a process that enabled them to forecast their profit and loss for the year and make it 90% better, but not 100% better, wouldn't they do it?
Sure.
So the fact that ERM can't always identify every single risk to the organization, it's far better to have identified a significantly higher number than not to have identified any or most. So I think that that's a bogus argument. Another criticism of ERM has been that ERM focuses on the negative rather than the positive. Well, think about it. What could be more positive than a process that has as its objective to help an organization meet its strategic mission and goals and objectives. I mean, it has a positive, forward-looking trajectory, or, you know, that it's there for a reason that's very positive, not negative. Is there an upside to risk too? Yes, and sometimes there can be an upside to risk. Think about a company that notices a risk that's evolving. Maybe it's a regulatory risk that will impact their product, and they redesign that product in advance of the regulatory change, and that product becomes a wildly successful bestseller for them. Well, that's the positive side of risk. So I don't think, again, that critique that ERM is negative is really an honest one. And the third criticism that has been leveled at ERM is that it's too expensive. And George, really, I've talked to many chief risk officers. Most of them are individual contributors. They don't have any staff at all, or they have a very small staff. They work closely with the risk management department that was in place before, or whomever was doing risk management before. Yes, there is some cost involved in going through an enterprise-wide identification of risk, but that expense, again, at the end of the day, is one that should have a payback to the company that's far in excess of the expense. So the fact is that ERM is generally not too expensive if you look at it against the value that it brings.